Welcome to the world behind midnight. Tonight, we uncover something that should have stayed buried. If you're hearing this, it's already too late. The distress call that reached Fort Bragg wasn't filed through normal channels. It came encrypted, marked with classifications that made seasoned intelligence officers pause before reading. 3 small towns along the Tennessee-North Carolina border had gone silent within 72 hours. Not evacuated, not destroyed by natural disaster, silent. The last transmission from local law enforcement mentioned tracks, impossible tracks, and a sound that made trained officers abandon their posts and flee into the night. Captain Jake Reeves read the briefing in the pre-dawn darkness of the Tactical Operations Center, his coffee growing cold in his hand. 20 years of special operations had shown him humanity's worst nightmares. Warlords, terrorists, insurgents. He'd faced them all with calculated precision. But the photographs spread across his desk showed something else entirely. Claw marks 8 inches deep in solid oak. Livestock torn apart with surgical brutality. And footprints that began as canine paws and ended as something disturbingly human. The brass wanted answers. More importantly, they wanted the problem contained before media hysteria spread beyond the isolated mountain communities. Reeves assembled his team with the efficiency of long practice. Sergeant First Class Maria Torres, his second in command, had survived 3 tours in hostile territories and possessed an unnerving ability to sense danger before it materialized. Corporal Daniel Chen, their communications specialist, could establish secure networks in the middle of nowhere. Private First Class Will Hunt, their newest member and trained tracker, brought wilderness survival skills learned from his Cherokee grandmother. They deployed under the cover story of a training exercise, their gear carefully selected to appear routine, while hiding that specialized equipment requisitioned for unconventional threats. Standard ammunition, yes, but also rounds that had been treated with silver alloy. A precaution that felt absurd until Reeves remembered the photographs. He'd learned long ago that healthy skepticism kept you alive, but rigid disbelief could get you killed. The Black Hawk touched down at dawn in a clearing 10 miles from the first silent town. The moment Reeves stepped onto Appalachian soil, he felt it, a wrongness in the air that raised the hair on his neck. The forest was too quiet. The usual morning chorus of birds and insects muted to an oppressive stillness. Torres met his eyes, her hand unconsciously checking her weapon. She felt it too. Will Hunt moved through the underbrush like a shadow, reading signs invisible to the others. His dark eyes scanned the forest floor, the tree line, the way light filtered through the canopy. "Something's been through here recently," he murmured, kneeling beside disturbed leaves. Big, moving fast. But the gate's wrong for a bear or mountain lion. It's bipedal sometimes, quadrupedal others. Like it changes. They established a forward operating base in an abandoned ranger station. Its windows shattered, interior showing signs of hasty evacuation. Coffee cups still sat on a desk, half full and moldy. A radio hung from its mount, microphone cords severed as if by massive teeth. On the wall, someone had scratched a message in what Reeves hoped was paint. "IT walks like us." The first 48 hours passed in tense patrols and frustrating dead ends. They found the towns all right. Empty buildings, cars parked normally, houses with dinner still on tables. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence, as if an entire population had simply evaporated. The only consistent evidence was the tracks. Those impossible transitioning prints that led into the forest and vanished. On the 3rd night, the howling began. It started distant, a mournful sound that could almost pass for a wolf's call. But as it continued, rising and falling in patterns that suggested intelligence rather than instinct. The team's unease crystallized into fear. This wasn't an animal's cry. It was communication. A language of predation and possession that resonated in their bones. Hunt stood apart from the others, his face turned toward the sound, expression unreadable in the darkness. Torres noticed his stillness, the way his hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. "You recognize it?" she asked quietly. Hunt's jaw tightened. My grandmother told stories. Old stories from before the reservations, when the Cherokee avoided certain mountains during certain moons. She called them the Tulkaloo's children, the walkers between shapes. Reeves felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Folklore and field operations didn't mix, but he'd learned to respect local knowledge, especially when conventional explanations failed. What do the stories say about fighting them? Hunt's silence stretched too long. The stories say you don't fight them, Captain. You survive them, or you become them. The attack came without warning on the fourth night. Chen was on perimeter watch, his night vision equipment scanning the tree line, when the howl erupted directly above him. He spun, weapon raised, and caught a glimpse of something massive launching from a branch 30 feet up. The creature moved with impossible speed, a blur of dark fur and gleaming eyes. Chen's scream lasted 2 seconds before cutting off with sickening finality. Reeves and Torres reached his position in seconds, weapons ready, finding only blood splattered across leaves and Chun's rifle, barrel bent at an impossible angle. The drag marks led into darkness so complete, their flashlights seemed to die within feet. Torres's breathing came fast and shallow. What the hell can bend a rifle barrel? Reeves had no answer, his mind rejecting the evidence his eyes provided. They found Chun's body at dawn, strung high in an ancient oak, posed with deliberate cruelty. His chest had been opened with surgical precision, organs arranged in a pattern that Hunt recognized with dawning horror. "It's a warning," he whispered. "The old patterns my grandmother drew. This is territory marking. It's telling us we're being hunted." The psychological warfare intensified. They'd find their equipment moved during the night, carefully rearranged to spell messages in Morse code. Leave. Mine. Hungry. Torres discovered her personal photo of her daughter placed on her sleeping bag, the edges torn by claws. The creature wasn't just hunting them, it was studying them, learning them, breaking them mentally before moving in for the kill. Private Hunt grew increasingly withdrawn, disappearing for hours during patrols, returning with scratches he couldn't explain and a haunted look in his eyes. Reeves confronted him on the 7th day, grabbing his collar and demanding answers. Hunt's eyes, when they met his, held a terrible knowledge. "Captain, there's something about my family history I need to tell you. My grandmother's stories, they weren't just folklore. They were warnings about bloodlines, about curses passed through generations." Before Hunt could continue, a howl erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, impossibly coordinated. The creature was playing with them, demonstrating control over the battlefield that no animal should possess. Reeves made a command decision. They needed to understand what they were facing, and that meant finding the source. Hunt led them deeper into the mountains, to a place he claimed his grandmother had once shown him, a place of old stones and older secrets. The clearing they reached, as afternoon shadows lengthened, was circular, surrounded by standing stones, weathered by centuries. Carved into each stone were figures, crude but unmistakable, humans transforming into beasts, beasts walking upright, and at the center, a single figure that seemed to shift depending on the angle of viewing. Hunt's hands trembled as he touched the central stone. "This is a binding site, a place where the Cherokee elders would perform rituals to contain the curse." Torres examined the carvings with a tactician's eye. Contain, not cure. Hunt shook his head. There is no cure. Once the bloodline is infected, it passes down through generations. The best they could do was create vessels, willing hosts who would take the curse upon themselves to protect the tribe. They'd live in isolation, coming to places like this during the transformation to prevent harm. Reeves felt the pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. "Your grandmother was teaching you about your own bloodline." It wasn't a question. Hunt's silence was confirmation enough. The radio crackled suddenly, Torres's voice tight with fear. "Captain, I've got movement on all sides. Multiple heat signatures, but they're wrong. The thermal imaging shows them shifting, changing temperature and size." The dogman revealed itself at sunset, stepping into the stone circle with an arrogance that spoke of total dominance. 9 feet of corded muscle covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. Its head was canine, but too large, too intelligent in the way its eyes tracked each soldier. The snout was elongated, filled with teeth that gleamed like ivory knives, but the hands, those were the worst. 5-fingered like a human's, but tipped with claws that curved wickedly. The creature's eyes burned with bioluminescent intensity, shifting from amber to blood red as it assessed them. Reeves had faced enemy combatants in dozens of operations, but nothing had prepared him for the intelligence behind that gaze. This wasn't an animal operating on instinct. This was a predator that understood tactics, psychology, and terror as weapons. It tilted its head, almost curious, and when it spoke, the sound was guttural, but unmistakably formed into words. "Soldiers," it growled, the voice like grinding stone wrapped in flesh. "You bring guns to a god's domain." The revelation that it could speak paralyzed them for precious seconds. Torres recovered first, her training overriding shock. She opened fire, controlled bursts aimed center mass. The silver alloy rounds struck true, and the creature howled, genuine pain in its voice. But instead of falling, it moved. The speed was impossible. One moment it stood at the circle's edge, the next it was on them. Claws swept out in an arc that caught Torres across the ribs, her tactical vest shredding like paper. She flew backward, slamming into a standing stone with force that drove the air from her lungs. Reeves fired, his own rounds finding flesh, but the creature seemed to absorb the impacts, its body shuddering but not stopping. Hunt stood frozen, his face a mask of horror and recognition. The creature turned its burning gaze on him, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. "Brother," the dogman snarled, "you wear human skin like a lie. I smell our blood in you. I smell the curse you fight." Hunt's hands trembled, his body beginning to convulse with changes he could no longer suppress. Reeves watched in disbelief as Hunt's form began to shift. It started with his eyes, the pupils elongating, iris color bleeding from brown to amber. His muscles bulged grotesquely, clothes tearing as his frame expanded. Bone cracked with sounds like gunshots, his spine extending, his jaw pushing forward into something between human and beast. Fur sprouted in patches across his skin, dark and coarse. His screams took on an animalistic quality that made Reeves's blood run cold. But unlike the creature before them, Hunt was fighting the transformation. His face contorted with effort, human consciousness battling for control against the curse in his blood. "Captain," he gasped through a throat already changing, "it's calling the curse out of me, trying to make me like him. You have to stop us both." His words dissolved into a howl of anguish as his body continued its horrific metamorphosis. Torres pulled herself upright, one hand pressed against her bleeding ribs, the other raising her weapon. She'd loaded a fresh magazine, these rounds pure silver rather than alloy, precious ammunition they'd brought as a last resort. "Reeves, we need to take them both down now." While Hunt's still fighting it, her voice was tight with pain and the terrible logic of their situation. The original dogman laughed, a sound that mixed human mockery with animal snarl. "Yes, soldier, kill your own. It's what you're trained for, isn't it? Following orders, even when they damn your soul." It moved toward Hunt's transforming form, claws extended. "Let me show him what he could be if he stopped fighting. Let me show him freedom." Reeves understood the creature's intent with sick clarity. It wanted to force Hunt's complete transformation, to create an ally, or at minimum break the last human's spirit by making him witness what his teammate would become. He positioned himself between the dogman and Hunt, weapon raised, knowing conventional tactics were useless but unable to surrender. "Hunt, fight it. Stay with us." Hunt's form was nearly unrecognizable now, caught between human and beasts, a grotesque amalgamation that should not exist. He stood on legs that bent wrong, hands that were too large, tipped with emerging claws, his face a nightmare of shifting features. but his eyes, still partially human, fixed on Reeves with desperate clarity. The silver, he managed through a muzzle, forming where his mouth had been, through the heart. It's the only way to kill the curse, not just the body. The original dogman charged, not at the soldiers, but at Hunt, seeing him as the greater threat now that transformation was occurring. The two beings collided with impact that shook the ground, their bodies tangling in combat that was both savage and strangely ritualistic. They fought not just with claws and teeth, but with an understanding of each other's nature. Movements that suggested ancient knowledge passed through cursed bloodlines. Torres circled, trying to get a clear shot, but the combatants moved too fast, their forms blurring together. Reeves saw an opening and took it, his silver rounds punching into the original dogman's flank. The creature roared, breaking away from Hunt, its attention snapping to Reeves with murderous focus. "You dare!" it snarled, blood streaming from the wounds. "I have walked these mountains for 3 centuries. I have worn 100 skins. You are nothing." 3 centuries. The words resonated with horrible implications. This wasn't just a cursed individual, but something far older. Something that had learned to prolong its existence through means Reeves didn't want to imagine. The creature's wounds were already closing, flesh knitting with unnatural speed. Even the silver wasn't enough to permanently damage it. Hunt, his transformation still incomplete, launched himself at the creature again. This time his attack was coordinated, purposeful. He grappled with the ancient dogman, his partially formed claws finding purchase in its fur, his strength enhanced by the curse he'd spent his life fighting. "Captain," he roared, "when I hold it, when I lock it down, you take the shot. Through both of us if you have to." The tactical part of Reeves's mind understood immediately. Hunt wasn't trying to defeat the creature, he was trying to contain it, to create a single target. Suicide tactics, but potentially their only chance. Torres understood too, her face pale but determined. She moved into optimal position, her weapon steady despite her wounds, finger on the trigger of rounds that could end both curse and cursed. The two dogmen struggled, and Reeves saw Hunt's strategy developing. He was using his partial transformation not to become the beast, but to match it, to fight from inside the curse's own power. His grandmother had trained him for this, prepared him to be the vessel that could contain what others couldn't. Every moment of his life had been leading to this clearing, this sacrifice. The ancient dogman sensed the trap too late. Hunt's arms locked around it, in a grapple that pinned them chest to chest, 2 hearts beating within feet of each other. "Now," Hunt screamed, his voice breaking between human and animal. "Torres, take the shot now." His eyes met Reeves's one last time, and in them was not fear, but relief. The burden he'd carried since childhood was finally ending. Torres's finger tightened on the trigger. The silver round left the barrel with a crack that echoed off the standing stones, cutting through the twilight air with purpose and finality. It struck Hunt's back, punched through his transforming heart, and continued into the ancient dogman's chest. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Both beings shrieked, a sound that combined human agony with animal fury, as the pure silver did what centuries of hunters had failed to achieve. The transformation reversed violently. Fur receded, bones cracked back into human configuration, muscles deflated from their grotesque swelling. The ancient dogman collapsed first, its form shrinking as supernatural prolongation failed. What hit the ground was a man, ancient and weathered, with a face that showed centuries of accumulated cruelty. He crumbled to dust within moments, his body aging in seconds to match his true years, leaving only bones and the faint scent of decay. Hunt fell more slowly, his body returning to human form but retaining its warmth, its life for precious final moments. Reeves was beside him instantly, cradling his head, professional detachment shattered by the weight of what Hunt had done. "You knew," Reeves said, voice breaking. "You knew this whole time what you'd have to do." Blood bloomed across Hunt's chest, but his face held an expression of profound peace. "My grandmother saw it," Hunt whispered, his voice fully human again, soft with approaching death, in dreams, in signs. She knew another cursed one had lost control, had become what we all fear becoming. She trained me to be the last vessel, the one who could get close enough to end it. His hand found Reeves's arm, grip weakening. Tell her I kept the oath. I protected the tribe. Even this tribe of soldiers became mine to protect. Torres knelt on his other side, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face, her own wound forgotten. You saved us, Hunt. You saved those towns, those people. Hunt's smile was sad, but genuine. I saved you from me, Sergeant. That's what matters. The curse needed a host. Better it die with me than find another. His breathing grew shallow, each word an effort. The sun had fully set now, and moonlight filtered through the stone circle, casting silver illumination over the scene of sacrifice. Hunt's eyes were closing, his hand going slack in Reeves's grip. Captain, he murmured, burn the stones, break the binding site. Let no one else find this place and think they can control what should never be awakened. His last breath carried words in Cherokee, a prayer his grandmother had taught him for the end. Then Will Hunt was still. Reeves remained kneeling beside the body, his mind struggling to process what had occurred. 20 years of combat operations, of classified missions and impossible odds, and nothing had prepared him for this. A soldier under his command had sacrificed himself, not in conventional battle, but in a war against his own blood, his own nature. The heroism was absolute, and it would never appear in any official record. Torres sat heavily against a standing stone, pressing field dressings against her ribs, her face reflecting the same shock and grief. We should call for extraction, she said numbly, but how do we explain any of this? The practical question hung in the air. Their unit had been 4. Now 2 remained, and the evidence surrounding them defied every protocol, every chain of command expectation. The ancient dogman's bones were already indistinguishable from any human remains, weathered and old. But Hunt's body was fresh, the wound from the silver round obvious. Chun's body still hung in the forest somewhere, posed with ritualistic cruelty. The towns remained silent, their populations vanished. How did they file a report that captured any meaningful truth while maintaining operational security? Reeves stood slowly, his joints protesting, his mind shifting into command mode despite the emotional devastation. We tell them what they need to hear. Hostile entity eliminated. Unit casualties due to engagement with extreme threat. Details classified. He looked at Torres. The silver rounds, the transformation, Hunt's sacrifice, all of that stays between us. No one would believe it anyway. They worked through the night, honoring Hunt's final request. Using C4 charges from their tactical gear, they systematically destroyed each standing stone, reducing the ancient binding site to rubble. The carvings that had stood for centuries crumbled, their warnings and records lost forever. Perhaps that was mercy. Some knowledge wasn't meant to pass forward through generations. As each stone fell, Reeves felt a change in the air, a pressure releasing. The oppressive weight that had hung over the forest since their arrival began to lift. By dawn, when the final stone was reduced to broken fragments, the forest sounded different. Birds began calling, insects buzzed. Normal sounds of life that had been absent for days returned as if a switch had been flipped. They recovered Chen's body with effort, untangling him from the tree where the dogman had displayed him. Torres said a quiet prayer, her voice steady despite the horror of the task. They wrapped him in a poncho, treating him with the dignity he deserved. Hunt's body received the same care, though both knew his sacrifice was different, chosen rather than imposed. The extraction call went through encrypted channels. A medical helicopter would arrive within the hour, asking no questions, filing paperwork that would classify the entire operation above top secret. The military had procedures for missions that went beyond conventional understanding. This wasn't the first time soldiers had encountered things that couldn't be explained, only contained and buried. While they waited, Reeves searched Hunt's personal effects. The leather journal he found was filled with Cherokee script, drawings that showed transformation stages, and notes about meditation techniques for controlling the curse. The last entry, written the night before they entered the stone circle, was in English. If you're reading this, Captain, I succeeded. The bloodline ends with me. Tell my grandmother this wasn't failure. This was always how it had to end. Some soldiers die for their country. I die protecting my people from what lives in our blood. Torres read over his shoulder, fresh tears falling silently. He knew exactly what he was doing from the moment he volunteered for this unit. Reeves nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Hunt had seen the reports of attacks, recognized the signs of a cursed one losing control, and inserted himself into the team specifically to get close enough to end it. His entire military service had been preparation for this single mission. The helicopter arrived with the sunrise, its rotors beating a rhythm that felt like a funeral march. The extraction team asked no questions, their faces professionally blank as they loaded body bags and wounded soldiers. Torres was strapped into a medical gurney despite her protests, her wounds serious enough to require immediate treatment. Reeves rode in the jump seat, Hunt's journal clutched in his hands, watching the Appalachian forest recede below. The debriefing lasted 3 days, conducted by officers whose rank insignia Reeves didn't recognize. They asked specific questions that suggested they knew more about supernatural threats than he'd imagined. His report was carefully worded, hostile entity eliminated through specialized tactics, casualties unfortunate but mission successful. They accepted it without pressing for details that would strain credibility. The military, it seemed, had long practice in filing away impossible truths. Torres was hospitalized for 2 weeks, her ribs fractured and internal bleeding requiring surgery. Reeves visited daily, and they spoke little, sharing silence that held more meaning than words. Both knew they'd witnessed something that would mark them forever. The nightmares came nightly, Hunt's transformation playing on loop, the sound of his final breaths echoing in the dark. Within 6 months, both had filed for discharge. The military tried to retain them, promising promotions and prestigious assignments, but neither could continue wearing the uniform. The weight of what they knew, what they'd seen, made conventional service impossible. How do you plan missions and follow orders when you know monsters are real, when you've watched a soldier become one to save you? Reeves found Hunt's grandmother through the Cherokee Nation's tribal registry. She lived in a small cabin in the North Carolina mountains, land her family had held for generations. When he arrived, she was waiting on the porch, as if she'd known he would come. Her face was weathered but beautiful, dark eyes holding the same depth he'd seen in Hunt's final moments. "You carry Will's journal," she said before Reeves could introduce himself. "He sent it to you, then, through his death." Her voice was calm, accepting. Reeves climbed the porch steps and offered the journal with both hands, a gesture of respect. She took it, but didn't open it. "Tell me how he died, Captain. I want to hear it from someone who was there." Reeves told her everything. The mission, the dogman, the transformation, and Hunt's sacrifice. He held nothing back, expecting disbelief or grief. Instead, she nodded slowly, tears falling silently down her face, but expression serene. He was always meant to be the last vessel. I saw it when he was born, the mark of the curse strong in his blood. I raised him for this purpose, teaching him control, preparing him to face what others of our bloodline could not. You knew he would die. Reeves couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. She met his eyes steadily. I knew he would be given the choice. Die to end the curse, or live to perpetuate it. He chose correctly. He chose honor over survival. That is why I mourn him as I celebrate him. She stood, gesturing for Reeves to follow. "Come, there is something you should have." Inside her cabin, she opened a wooden box carved with the same symbols Reeves had seen on the standing stones. From it, she drew a silver pendant shaped like a wolf's head, crafted with traditional silversmithing techniques. The chain was delicate, but strong. This was made for Will when he was born, from silver blessed by our medicine people. It was meant to protect him, to give him strength in his battle with the curse. He never wore it, saying it should go to the one who helped him end it. She placed it in Reeves's palm, closing his fingers around it. Wear this, Captain, not as decoration, but as reminder. My grandson's sacrifice was not tragedy, it was triumph. He defeated the curse that had plagued our bloodline for generations. He died a warrior, protecting others from himself. There is no greater honor. Her words were blessing and burden both, and Reeves accepted them with a nod. Years passed, but the weight never fully lifted. Reeves wore the pendant under his shirt, a constant reminder of the soldier who'd sacrificed everything. He never married, never found peace in civilian life, but he found purpose in ensuring Hunt's story wasn't completely lost. He wrote it down, changing names and locations, framing it as fiction, but preserving the essential truth for those who needed to know. Torres stayed in touch, brief messages on anniversaries of the mission, checking in to confirm the other still carried the burden of knowledge. They met once a year, always on the date Hunt died, sharing a drink in silence to the soldier who'd saved them. Neither ever spoke of that night to anyone else, maintaining the covenant of silence that protected both Hunt's sacrifice and the world's ignorance. The towns that had gone silent repopulated gradually, their residents returning with fragmented memories and persistent nightmares, but no clear recollection of what had driven them away. Psychologists diagnosed mass hysteria, environmental factors, but Reeves knew better. The dogman's presence had been so overwhelming, so unnatural, that the human mind had protected itself through forgetting. Only those who'd faced it directly carried the full memory. On one anniversary visit to the site where the stone circle had stood, Reeves found the rubble overgrown, nature reclaiming the space. But among the weeds and moss, he discovered fresh flowers, traditional Cherokee arrangements. Hunt's grandmother, or perhaps other tribal members who knew the old stories, still honored the place. The curse might be ended, but the memory was preserved in ways outsiders couldn't access. Reeves stood in that clearing as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, and he felt Hunt's presence. Not haunting, but comforting, a confirmation that the sacrifice had meaning beyond the moment. The dogman was gone, truly ended. The bloodline was broken, and in the mountains where 3 towns had fallen silent, life continued. Protected by a soldier whose name would never appear on monuments, but whose heroism eclipsed conventional valor. The final years of Captain Reeves's life were marked by a strange duality. To the world, he was a retired Special Forces officer, living quietly in a mountain cabin, occasionally consulting on security matters. But in the darkness of his own mind, he remained forever in that stone circle, watching Will Hunt transform and sacrifice himself. The memory never faded, never softened with time. If anything, it grew sharper, more vivid, as if his mind insisted he never forget. Torres visited less frequently as years accumulated, her own life demanding attention. She'd married, had children, found ways to integrate the horror into a functional existence. But Reeves saw the knowledge in her eyes during their meetings. The way she sometimes stared into middle distance, as if seeing something others couldn't. They were both marked. Forever changed by witnessing the impossible and surviving only through another's sacrifice. Hunt's grandmother died when Reeves was in his 60s, passing peacefully in her sleep, according to the tribal notification he received. He attended the funeral, standing at the back of the gathering, listening to Cherokee prayers he didn't understand, but felt in his bones. She was buried on family land, near the place where generations of her bloodline had fought the curse. With her death, the last direct link to the old knowledge passed, and Reeves felt a chapter closing, but closure proved elusive. In his 70s, Reeves began experiencing dreams that felt less like memory and more like communication. He'd see Hunt, not as he'd died, but as he'd lived, healthy and whole, speaking words Reeves couldn't quite hear but understood intuitively, warning him, preparing him for something. When he woke, the silver pendant on his chest would be warm, almost hot, as if responding to proximity to supernatural forces. The dreams intensified until one night. Reeves woke to find the pendant glowing faintly, pulsing with inner light that matched his heartbeats. He sat up, hand closing around it, and felt a pull, an unmistakable compulsion toward the mountains. At his age, such a journey should have been impossible. His body protested movement, arthritis, and old injuries limiting mobility. But the call was undeniable, and Reeves found himself packing gear with the efficiency of his prime, muscle memory overriding physical limitations. He drove through the night, following instinct more than maps, arriving at dawn at a trailhead he didn't consciously remember, but recognized bone deep. The path wound upward, through terrain that should have been beyond his capability. Yet he climbed with strength that felt borrowed, as if something was sustaining him for this final journey. Hours passed in a blur, and he found himself standing in a clearing he'd never seen but instantly knew. This wasn't where the stone circle had been. This was older, deeper in the mountains, a place untouched by modern presence. Natural stone formations created a ring, and within it, the ground was bare despite surrounding vegetation. Reeves stepped into the circle and felt reality shift, the air thickening, time becoming fluid. He was no longer entirely in the present moment, but somewhere between, a liminal space where past and future overlapped. Hunt appeared, not as ghost, but as presence, as real as memory made tangible. He looked as he had before the final transformation, young and whole, dressed in the mixture of tactical gear and traditional items that had been his signature. "Captain," he said, and his voice carried warmth Reeves hadn't heard in decades. "You carried the pendant faithfully. You honored the sacrifice. Now you need to understand why it still matters." Reeves wanted to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions that had accumulated over years, but Hunt held up a hand. "The curse I ended was one branch, one bloodline. But curses are like roots, Captain. You cut the main one, and the tree dies. But seeds remain, scattered, dormant. Not all dogmen are connected. Some bloodlines developed independently, in different tribes, different continents. What I ended was the ancient one, the original, but others exist." The revelation sent cold dread through Reeves's chest. "You're saying there are more?" Hunt nodded slowly. "Not many, and most fight the curse as I did, containing it, living in isolation. But some, like the ancient one I faced, embrace it. They become what we fought. They need to be stopped, but only those who carry the knowledge can do it. That's why the pendant called you here. That's why you needed to understand." Hunt gestured, and the air shimmered, images forming like smoke given substance. Reeves saw other clearings, other stone circles, scattered across the world. He saw individuals bearing the curse, some fighting it with meditation and ritual, others surrendering to bestial hunger. He saw hunters, descendants of tribal warriors, tracking the cursed ones, maintaining the eternal battle between human will and supernatural corruption. An invisible war fought in shadows that most of humanity never knew existed. "You can't fight anymore," Hunt said gently, acknowledging Reeves's age. "But you can teach. The pendant is more than memorial, Captain. It's a key. Those who wear it can sense the curse in others, can identify who fights it and who embraces it. You need to pass it on to someone who can continue the work. Someone military, who will be believed when they report impossible things. Someone who will honor the sacrifice and continue the protection." Reeves understood. His entire life since the mission had been preparation for this moment, this revelation. Hunt's sacrifice hadn't ended the threat permanently. It had bought time, broken one cycle, but eternal vigilance remained necessary. "Who?" Reeves asked, his voice hoarse. "Who do I pass this to?" Hunt smiled sadly. "You'll know them when you meet them. Trust your instincts. The pendant will recognize them." The vision faded, Hunt's form dissolving like morning mist. But his final words hung in the air. "Thank you for remembering me, Captain. Thank you for carrying the weight. Now pass it forward. The battle isn't over. It's never over." Reeves stood alone in the clearing, the pendant warm against his chest, understanding settling like a stone in his gut. This was his final mission, his last order. Find the next guardian. Pass on the knowledge. Ensure the sacrifice wasn't wasted. He descended the mountain slowly, his borrowed strength fading, leaving him with the familiar aches and limitations of age. But his purpose was crystallized, clearer than it had been in decades. He returned to his cabin and began writing, not fiction this time, but instruction, a manual for the next guardian. Everything he'd learned, everything Hunt had taught him through sacrifice and revelation. The truth of the dogman, the curse, the methods of containment and elimination. Torres received a call 3 months later. Reeves's neighbor had found him in his cabin, seated at his desk, pen still in hand, expression peaceful. Heart failure, the doctors said, quick and painless. But Torres knew better when she arrived to handle his effects. She found the completed manual, hundreds of pages detailing the impossible, written with precision and care. And beside it, the silver pendant resting on an envelope with her name. Inside the envelope was a letter. Maria, you carry the weight, as I do. But you have a daughter, connections to the living world. Find someone without those ties, someone military who's seen enough to believe, but young enough to act. Give them the pendant. Give them the manual. Tell them Will Hunt's story. Make sure they understand this isn't mythology. It's an ongoing war, and we're the only ones fighting it. Torres held the pendant, feeling its warmth, and understood and thundered her own final mission. She'd been carrying the burden alongside Reeves, but now it fell to her alone. The responsibility to find the next generation, to pass forward the knowledge and the tools needed to continue Hunt's work. She thought of her daughter, safe and ignorant of the horrors that existed in shadow. That safety had been purchased with Hunt's blood and Reeves's lifetime of vigilance. She couldn't let it end. The search took Torres 2 years. She attended military functions, observed young officers, assessed them with criteria that transcended standard evaluation. She needed someone skilled, but not rigid. Someone who'd faced enough horror to accept the impossible, but retained enough humanity to care about protecting others. Someone who'd honor Hunt's sacrifice by continuing his mission. The candidates were few, and Torres rejected most after brief observation. This required someone special. She found him at a veterans gathering. A young captain named David Morrison, who'd recently left special operations after a mission in Eastern Europe that had left his entire team dead, except him. He spoke little, eyes holding the haunted quality Torres recognized in her own reflection. When she approached him, she saw him stiffen defensively, but his manners won out. They talked, carefully at first, about service and sacrifice, about the weight of surviving when others didn't. Torres mentioned cryptic details, testing his reaction. Strange encounters during missions. Things that didn't match official reports. Morrison's eyes sharpened, and he leaned forward. "You've seen them too," he said quietly. "The things they tell us don't exist. I lost my team to something in the Romanian mountains. Something that walked upright but wasn't human. Official report says enemy combatants, but I know what I saw." That was the confirmation Torres needed. She arranged a private meeting, bringing the manual and the pendant. Over the course of a long evening, she told Morrison everything. Hunt's sacrifice, Reeves's revelation, the ongoing nature of the curse. She watched him process it, saw disbelief war with recognition, saw him finally accept what he'd already known deep down. The monsters were real. The war was eternal, and someone had to fight it. Morrison held the pendant, and Torres saw it pulse with faint light in his palm, responding to something in him that marked him as the next guardian. "Why me?" he asked, voice rough with emotion. Torres smiled sadly. "Because you've already paid the price. You've lost your team. You know the weight of survival, and most importantly, you haven't given up. You're still looking for purpose, for a way to make their deaths mean something. This is it. This is how you honor them." The pendant settled around Morrison's neck, as if it had always belonged there, and Torres felt a weight lift from her own shoulders. She'd completed her final mission, passed the burden to capable hands. She gave Morrison the manual, Hunt's journal, and Reeves's notes. Everything you need to know is in there. How to identify the cursed ones. How to distinguish between those fighting it and those embracing it. How to kill what shouldn't be able to die. Morrison absorbed it all with the focus of someone receiving crucial intelligence. And if I find one who's fighting the curse, like Hunt was, what then? Torres met his eyes steadily. You help them maintain control. You give them the tools to fight it. You honor their battle. Not everyone with the curse deserves death, Captain. Many are victims who deserve support. The pendant will help you sense the difference. Trust it. Trust yourself. They parted with understanding between them. Two soldiers who'd glimpsed the war beneath the surface, one passing the torch to the next. Torres returned to her family, finally able to let the burden go, knowing it was in capable hands. Morrison disappeared from conventional military circles, becoming a ghost who appeared when supernatural threats emerged, always arriving just in time, always knowing where to look. Years later, Torres received a brief message. First target eliminated. Bloodline in Chicago ended. 3 cursed ones in custody, fighting transformation successfully with new techniques. Hunt would be proud. The work continues. She smiled, recognizing Morrison's terse military style. The war went on, fought by those willing to sacrifice normal life for the protection of those who'd never know the danger existed. In the mountains where Hunt had died, where Reeves had received his final revelation, the forest grew thick and healthy. The curse that had plagued those particular peaks was truly ended, the bloodline severed permanently. But elsewhere, in other mountains, other forests, other wild places where humanity's grasp was tenuous, the dogmen still walked. Some fought their nature, some surrendered to it, and between them moved the guardians, carrying silver and knowledge, maintaining the eternal vigil. Morrison trained others as the years passed, carefully selecting individuals who'd proven themselves capable of handling impossible truths. The network grew slowly, a scattered brotherhood of warriors fighting a war that couldn't be acknowledged. They carried silver bullets and blessed blades. They studied ancient texts and modern genetics. They honored Will Hunt's sacrifice by continuing his mission, protecting humanity from threats born in blood and curse. Torres died peacefully in her 80s, surrounded by children and grandchildren who never knew the horrors she'd faced, the weight she'd carried. In her final moments, she saw Hunt standing at the foot of her bed, young and whole, smiling with gratitude. He'd been waiting, she realized, to thank her properly, for carrying the burden, for finding Morrison, for ensuring his sacrifice mattered beyond the moment. Then she slipped away, joining him and Reeves in whatever waited beyond, her duty finally, completely fulfilled. Morrison continued alone for another decade before finding his own replacement, the cycle perpetuating. Each guardian added their own experiences to the manual, expanding knowledge, refining techniques. The curse couldn't be entirely eliminated, woven too deeply into certain bloodlines, genetics, and supernatural reality. But it could be managed, contained, and the cursed ones could be helped or stopped, depending on their choice. The work was never-ending but essential. In classified military archives, buried under levels of security that few could access, reports accumulated, encounters with unidentified entities, specialized elimination protocols, casualties attributed to conventional causes, but accompanied by evidence that suggested otherwise. The military knew, had always known, that some threats existed outside standard operational parameters. They maintained units, unofficial and deniable, to handle such situations. Morrison and his successor guardians were part of that invisible infrastructure. The Dogman legend persisted in folklore, sightings reported by hikers and hunters, dismissed by authorities as misidentification or hoax. But among those who knew, who'd seen the evidence or fought the creatures, the truth was understood. The curse was real. The dogmen walked among humanity, some fighting for control, others surrendering to predation, and standing between them and civilian populations were the guardians, soldiers who'd sacrificed normal life to continue a war that predated nations and would outlast civilizations. Will Hunt's name appeared in no memorial. No monument honored his sacrifice, but in the hearts of those who carried the pendant, who fought the eternal war, his memory lived. He was the example, the standard, the proof that the cursed weren't inherently monsters. They were individuals facing impossible struggle, and sometimes, with enough will and support, they could be heroes. Hunt had chosen honor over survival. That choice echoed through generations, inspiring guardians to maintain faith that the battle was worth fighting. The forest stands quiet now, in the mountains where this story began. Birds sing their morning songs. Deer move cautiously through underbrush. Hikers pass through, marveling at natural beauty, never knowing the horror that once haunted these peaks. The curse is ended here, but elsewhere it persists. The dogmen still transform under certain moons. The guardians still hunt and help in equal measure. And somewhere, a young soldier is receiving a silver pendant, accepting a burden they don't fully understand yet, but will come to honor. The cycle continues. The war goes on, and Will Hunt's sacrifice remains the foundation, the reminder that monsters can be defeated, but only through courage, sacrifice, and the absolute commitment to protecting others, even at the cost of everything. That truth, more than any weapon, is what keeps the darkness at bay. That truth is what lives on in the world behind midnight, where shadows breathe, silence screams, and heroes emerge from the places we fear to look. If you carried Hunt's burden with us, if you felt the weight of impossible choices, then you understand what lives in the darkness beyond dawn. Subscribe to the world behind midnight. The next story waits, and the shadows are always listening. Some tales demand to be told. Some sacrifices must be witnessed. Stay with us, in the darkness where truth lives.